What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Off the Top. With today being a March podcast, we wanted to dive into something that a lot of you guys, I'm sure, are eagerly awaiting and have your brackets ready for. We're going to be talking about some March Madness in college basketball.
Yeah, today is also the day that we sprang forward 1 hour, which I was not expecting. But yeah, we're going to talk college basketball and some different hot topics that have been around the scene or just college athletics and relate it to March Madness. And hopefully you get some insight on some of the stuff that goes down in college athletics.
Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying March Madness is one of my favorite times of year, especially being a college basketball fan, just because of the excitement of what's going on. These kids are playing for the love of the game, and some of them are playing to keep their careers alive too. So there's a lot on the line for these kids, and you could definitely see it in their play.
Yeah, and I think the atmosphere of March Madness keeps on growing with the growth of technology. You can watch it on your phone, your tablet. People watch it at school, in class, or in the bathrooms. There's always updates everywhere about it. You could win millions of dollars for getting the best bracket in the world. You can make bets with your friends. You could do all these different strategies and pick teams by colors or pick teams by players or, letters or whatever people do. It's always interesting to see that dynamic, but it's something that is kind of exciting over that time of March.
Yeah, and I mean, like you were saying about picking, in the past there's been quite a few tournaments and contests of actually picking the winner where you can win some serious cash. I know Berkshire Hathaway did one where I believe the winner won $1 billion. And granted, guys, picking the perfect bracket is, the probabilities of doing that is like getting struck by lightning twice.
Yeah, the amount of teams, I mean, you have 4 divisions of 16 teams that break down all the way into, the Final Four, top 1. So for each team, you have a whole complete set of different options that takes the number 1 or the 16 seed and, the Northwest to win the championship. There's so many things that can change and so many variables that once we find this number and tell you the probability of winning a bracket, it should make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you said, you got to pick a winner, and then if you pick that right winner, then you have to pick the right matchup that they're going to go against, and so on in the future until it gets to a point where everything is set out in the perfect place. Do you happen to have that number, by the way?
Yeah, the number is a little bit larger than I was expecting, but I'm just going to kind of round it off at 1 in 9.2 quintillion. So that's a lot. That's a whole lot of options. I think if you're in your average lifetime, say you live to 71, this is from a YouTube video I just saw, you live 2 trillion seconds. So there are by far a lot more options than you'd have to pick at 1 per second, or 1 bracket per second at that point.
Wow. Well, if that doesn't show you why Berkshire Hathaway did that, then I don't know what will.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And I think too, if I got the perfect bracket and I won, I think the average I hear is $1 million. There's probably, Berkshire Hathaway is probably one of the top dogs that does a ton of money, but I would be kind of upset if my odds were that good and I won the March Madness with a perfect bracket. Not saying you can choose where you win, but I'd rather win like a Powerball jackpot than just $1 million for a perfect bracket.
Yeah, but at the same time, I would say that you playing the odds and winning that, it shows a lot more about your skill as well. And granted, winning a Powerball would be awesome, but and also I do think that it was more than $1 million. Let me double check on that.
Yeah, I know ESPN's is $1 million. Berkshire Hathaway probably was around $1 billion, or I've heard like Warren Buffett put up hundreds of millions, so individuals. But the big one a lot of people enter is the $1 million one through ESPN or like CBS Sports or something. As much as I say there's like skill to picking a bracket, at a certain point there's like a lot of luck that happens because you're relying on teams of 10 players and each individual characteristic to help them push over just based on your time frame, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I just did some quick checking and I was incorrect on that statement. But what it is this year specifically for all you bracket fillers is if you fill out the perfect bracket and submit to Berkshire Hathaway's contest, you will get $1 million a year for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, saying the average life is 72, I have equivalently $50 million coming that way, which is a ton of money. Nice at those payments too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, Julian, do you specifically have a team that you're pulling for, or some Cinderella teams that you think might make a run?
I haven't really watched college basketball this year or paid attention. I just know there's been a ton of number one seeds, a bunch of teams losing and getting upset. I'm not too sure who's still in the NCAA and didn't transfer to the NBA, and if the big names I'm hearing about, if their teams are actually good or not. So I'm just shooting from the hip on this one and seeing what damage I can do. Gotcha.
So personally, I think that Xavier's looking strong coming in, and I know a few people will be like, well, actually, X, Y, and Z, but I just like the team itself, the dynamic. I mean, they know how to win, especially when it comes to winning tournaments and, beating matchups and stuff like that. So if I had to pick a team, and that's not me putting a lot of stock in that, but I could see Xavier going in again.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just so many options between teams that are veteran loaded in college, which is pretty rare, or you have teams that, have good dynamic or rolling well. It's always a difficult choice to pick the team or have an idea of the top 4 teams, which it seems to get really hard for me. I'm like, well, maybe, but I only make one bracket. I could make multiple, but I just make one and that's my one,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would believe that a lot of people do that, but then you see the people that, make, well, this is the Cinderella bracket, or this is the bracket for my favorite colors, stuff like that.
Yeah. So I was reading something that says March Madness on average, or signed a contract with CBS in 2007 for $10.8 billion, like a TV contract. And that March Madness on average brings in $900 million to $1 billion just for the month of March in revenues. These are revenues, not profits. Which is, I think it's a crazy amount of money for college athletics, or just this month in general.
Yeah, I mean, that's an insane amount of money. And to think about it and how the business is set up, and everything as far as endorsements go, as far as how you make that money with playing basketball games with college players, it's quite extraordinary to think about that. College sports in this specific, basketball, or men's basketball, is so huge.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because college football is giant, but I don't think it does nearly the same numbers as March Madness does for the time it's going, and the TV networks it's always on, or streaming, or the content that's being published, or the ads being pushed through is something significant for, a college sport.
Yeah, definitely. And it just shows the magnitude of, who follows it, how the fans feel about it, and how the endorsers feel about it too, because they put their money where they think the fans are going to be. So, I mean, it's just a chain reaction of, this anticipated hype, so to speak, of this event, especially in March itself. I mean, throughout the whole year, you'll get revenues, you'll get endorsers and everything, but in this kind of the little time slot of the year, it's March Madness.
Yeah. And I guess I could see that how it alludes to the recent scandal in NCAA sports is certain programs have been probed by the FBI for paying players or bribing players to commit to play at their school. So some bribes could have been a couple free meals, or a free hotel, or actual dollar amounts ranging from like $2,000 to $100,000, which based on a lot of the reports I saw, none of it's going directly to the players, but coaches are influencing their parents or the people around them with like, yeah, your athlete is really good and we'd really like him here, so we'll help you out by giving you X and Y if you can, kind of leverage him to come here or them to come here.
Yeah, and especially now, because it's more prevalent than usual. I mean, there's always murmurs about that stuff, but now that there's been actually some significant findings, it makes you kind of reflect and look back on how it's kind of set up, and understandably so. It makes these players make a lot of money. So, for your program to be as successful as possible, you want to get those players who have the most hype or have, a lineage behind their name, things like that. And also it shows that, the dynamic and the dialogue of college players should be paid, definitely comes into a different light when you hear about, people getting recruited to go to X, Y, or Z school and also get some sort of dollar incentive or other incentives as well.
Yeah, and I think that the narrative of college athletes being paid is becoming more and more talked about as, media and technology rises, and like someone like me who's not anywhere near related to the NCAA, the company of the NCAA sports division or whatever that is, but I can just go onto Google and find out the size of contracts they're getting and like their revenues, and within like 30 seconds, most of these numbers that I've come up with, I found while all Jordan's talking, and that it's just really easy to find. As 20 or 30 years ago, you weren't finding this information about how much money the NCAA was really making, or articles really weren't being released, like the one recently that the NCAA just broke, I think a billion in revenues or something. Some other division just broke like $1 billion in revenues for them. And you're just getting all these other articles about the number of figures coming in. And I think, it can allude to some of the shady stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely... I don't think it's very fair either to the players, especially, them having to, if you feel like you have the right to be paid because you bring money into the school, and basically, granted, you are getting a free education and there is value to that. But at the same time, if you still feel like you should be paid, and the only route is like an underhanded, backsided way, I don't think that's very fair. And granted, you should probably be smart enough not to do that, because, you risk a lot of things, either getting, like there's been stories about people getting their Heisman taken away, or, Louisville just got championships taken away in Final Four appearances and things like that. So I'm in the belief that, with the amount of money that these players bring in, I don't think it's insane to have them being paid at all. And I've heard that other people like in the NBA have also said that as well.
Yeah, and I think the thing you have to look at too is like a lot of people, when they think about college athletes getting paid, you think of like these superstars that are going to the NBA for sure, and they're like, well, they're getting a free education, this and that. But like the way I look at it is, one, those superstars are going to make money regardless, and they have their free education. But the number of schools that only have a couple full rides, or the amount of walk-ons that go to some of these schools, like I guarantee if you're walking on at Pepperdine, or you're good enough to walk on at Pepperdine, or like a Harvard or something along that lines, they aren't going to pay for your school for 2 or 3 years. So you're in the struggle of, you're walking on your own, your choice. You can't work or anything. You also have school, which you're going to be missing because you're a student athlete and you're traveling. And just like the demand of that sport, well, you're not being compensated at all, and maybe you're still taking out those hefty loans. There's a ton of players like that don't even play in the games. Like they're like 13th man on the bench, and they're just there for the love of the game, it's awesome for them that they're there. But I think they should be rewarded for, that commitment. Is because at the end of the day, they don't have to do that. They could just go work at McDonald's or make more money than a college athlete who brings in thousands or millions of dollars to the university or NCAA does.
So you think that if it was the case that players got paid, that those players would get paid as well?
Well, I think you at the money amount that the NCAA makes, like if you offered them a minimum wage in their state for 25 hours a week or 30 hours a week, there's definitely enough money there to be spread around, or for players. No one would. I don't think anyone would complain, because the superstars are going to make it anyways. And if you have the opportunity to walk on and necessarily get a part-time job, I think it's the equivalent.
So almost like a subsidy for those college athletes if they aren't getting their scholarship paid for, everything paid for, as, you know, the state minimum wage for their. I think that would be fair. Is that how you think, like, you know, the full structure would be in your idea, or like your mind, or how would that differ?
Yeah, I don't think minimum wage is hard to offer. And I think if you can't offer like minimum wage to players that are, you know, walk on opposed to like $15 an hour to your superstars, because that's against what I think what college athletics stands for at that point. That's just difference in contracts and skill set. But I think if you're paying players minimum wage for their 30 hours a week or however many hours a week they do, or you cap it at 30 or whatever it is, you get rid of the argument from all sides, like equivalent to what I'm working while in college at like 20 hours a week. Like I have enough to pay rent and buy food and kind of use some disposable income, which is like, I don't need really more than that until I leverage my education to get a job. And that's what, you know, the athletics should be, in my point of view, is leveraging, you know, athletics. You're getting paid minimum wage, you're making it through, and then you leverage that education to get a job afterwards.
Okay. What I could see happening there happening in general, if they start getting paid, is you'll kind of like what you see in the NBA, you'll have like super teams starting to form. And granted, there are super teams in college athletics, and you'll hear about them as, you know, Kentucky, or, you know, your perennial powerhouses of Duke and North Carolina. But I could see it definitely having some severe ramifications on those schools that make runs late, especially in the March Madness, because, you know, why would I go to Richmond if, you know, VCU or Creighton's offering me $5,000 more, or, you know, University of Oregon's offering me $20,000 more? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I think you could look at NCAA could really be like, their fingers really could be in there though. Like if it's a taxable document and you have someone on top of everything, you're making sure everything's adequate. Or maybe you set across the NCAA just a federal minimum wage for the NCAA, so everyone's making $9 an hour or whatever it is, where it's equivalent across the board. Or maybe it's $6 an hour, or I don't know how that would work, but you could still make it equivalent across the board and tax it so that you aren't going to states that pay more per state, or everyone makes federal minimum wage or whatever it is. And then if someone's offering a bonus or an incentive, the NCAA could be in there like, nah, you can't do that. Or like, it gives them, the NCAA, more reason than them covering their ass for like, oh, you gave this player money? Oh, like, we don't like that, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, that's definitely fair. Yeah, I definitely, we both agree on that these players make a huge economic impact in a great way for these universities and the NCAA in general. So I do believe that they should have some sort of benefit for the benefit that they are producing, you know, as far as it's basically free labor, and they bring in, like you said, without those players, the NCAA doesn't exist, and that $10 billion contract isn't there. So I think that they deserve, through their hard work, effort, and what they bring into the community, they deserve some sort of economic benefit, regardless if it's, you know, you free meals or, you know, something like that, just so that they aren't, you know, they're producing such a great good and such a high dollar amount of revenue that it seems almost misplaced to not give them money, or, you know, you're remiss in your responsibility of, you know, having these people work for free because they love the game and want to, but some of them are living like very, very broke college students at the same time. So it's kind of, you see this dichotomy of, well, they produce so much money, but they're also struggling to, feed themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think the funny thing to me is when people are like, well, they're college athletes, they're getting free education. And the way I like to look at it is, okay, dude who said this on Twitter comments, like, I want you to go to your job and your job to produce $1 billion in revenue, and you get paid nothing, but you get free work experience for 40 hours a week. And you can't, I guess they just changed free meals, but you get a free meal every now and again. And they'll pay for your meal plan, and you can live in the work dorms or something along that lines. It puts in a lot different perspective for me, at least, when some of the people I see comment about it, it's like, you're just comparing it different because you like watching them and you like watching college sports, and you don't want to understand that they're getting paid or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of like that. I mean, they're as somebody who played college sports, you are working that sport for probably, I mean, granted, this is just in my head, but I'm saying definitely over 40 hours a week. You're either, thinking, specifically me, I was either doing stuff for basketball, working out, meeting with coaches, stuff like that. So that's kind of what it is. You put in that time, the time that you'd probably be working, like that equivalent amount of time, maybe even more, depending on the sport, depending on the program, depending on the athlete, and, produce this economic benefit. And, to get a free education is very valuable, but in the same point, or like the same tune, it's like, is it comparable? Is it equivalent to what they're producing? And granted, it doesn't need to be, a 1-to-1 ratio, but I think it should be a little bit more convergent into the median or middle.
Yeah, and I think the NCAA needs to step in on that too, because I think there's a lot of cases you hear about, tutors or like easy A classes, like these, whatever sport you're playing, whether it's volleyball or basketball or track, like you're missing a good amount of class or a good chunk of class in some of these higher sports. Like I think the NAI has it set up where you only play on weekends most of the time, like occasionally you travel, but it's like a Friday and a Saturday or a Sunday. But like NCAA, they'll play on, Wednesday night, and they'll have to fly or something like that. So you're missing a ton of class. And some of these programs have been accused or caught for just giving students A's, like, oh, here's your free education and here's an A in Swahili. Like, that's not too beneficial. Or offering a degree in general studies, or like, it's just a kind of a weird concept for me to apprehend when they're offering this education. And then they're like, you don't have to take some of these classes, but we'll make one that looks like you're taking it so you can get through or maintain that minimum GPA. Yeah,
I do believe that that's kind of more on the players, though, in the fact that it's, nobody's forcing them to take a class about painting or, painting 101 or, your easy A classes that you'll find. Nobody's forcing them to take that. Granted, they might feel pressure to take that just to maintain their GPA or, be able to keep up in school when you're missing a lot of it. But I think that it has a lot to do with the players. And granted, like I know D1 athletes or former D1 athletes, and they tell me how, the tutor situation works and stuff like that. So it's definitely here and there as far as, there's bad sides of that the players are doing to themselves, and then their schools are enabling them to do X, Y, or Z as well. But I think that the education wise, like, if the only thing you're getting is a free education, make it worth your money. I know it might be tough to do physics instead of, your art degree or, your leadership or outdoor, something degree, but it definitely is more meaningful for your time.
Yeah. And I think the smartest thing that's happened is a player from probably like the 90s sued the NCAA, because this is where I think the conversation really took a notch up, is when for a while, the NCAA was making video games with character like similarness to real players and using real names, and these players weren't getting paid for that. And I think it was just really smart on that part for who it was that, sued the NCAA, said like I didn't sign off on being in this video game and you're using my likeness to sell it. I think that was a smart thing. I don't agree with that. Like, someone came into your home and took a photo of you and then sold it at Abercrombie and Fitch or something like that, and you were on the wall, you probably wouldn't like that if you weren't getting paid like a good amount or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Which has happened specifically to me only. But yeah, no, I totally agree with that as well. But with that being said, and let's kind of lean more into the basketball realm, what do you think is the difference between the players, or maybe there isn't, but what do you think the difference is between staying in college and trying to go straight to the pros?
For the audience, Jordan and I have talked about this before, and my solution is you should either be able to go straight out of high school, or you should stay in like, if you commit to a college, you should stay there for 3 years. I think it'll make college basketball better in the fact that you'll have veteran teams, you'll be familiar with players, as it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. As opposed to, like, if you go to high school, that's your choice. I mean, that's how the world works. Like, if you think you're good enough and your people around you are like, yeah, it's a great idea, you're going to forgo playing in college and you go to, to the draft and there's 60 picks and you don't get picked. That's on you. Like, you have to understand where you're at and really know, because it's happened before. Like, look at LeBron or Dwight Howard or Kobe. Like, those dudes were good and they knew they were good and they made it, and that was them. Like, but if you're a kid who's just going to college to be there for 4 months, like Ben Simmons, it's just a waste of time. I think it hurts the NCAA overall, just because there's no continuity of the teams. And, like, that's where you get the scandals of players rather getting paid. Like, I'll get paid for my 4 months here, and then if it gets caught, well, I'm in the NBA.
Yeah, exactly. I do believe in Steve Kerr, the Golden State Warriors head coach, mentioned this or talked about this point too. I do believe that if it's for the kids as well, that they should also be able to go back to school if they go to the draft and don't get drafted, and go back to school in the fact that, they can obviously have the right to go back to school and pursue education, but maybe even allow them to pay through their school with their college sports as well. I mean, it makes it a little bit more dicey, but if it is for the benefits of these players, I think that would be something to think about.
Yeah, and I think the NBA might need to step up their G League, which is it used to be called the D League, but now it's the G League, owned by Gatorade. I think they need to implement a bigger system like that if this is the route things are going, and the popularity of the NBA is making maybe a league below that, a more supplemental, almost farmer league type, because realistically you have 60 picks for the NBA draft. You have hundreds of international players, which international basketball is becoming huge. Like, if anyone tells you, oh, I'll go play overseas, that's not easy. And then you have all these kids out of college or prep schools or whatever it is. I think if they added another league, that might help in the long run. Yeah,
well, that's what I think LeVar's doing.
Yeah, he's a weird dude.
But I hope you guys really enjoyed this podcast about March Madness and the plights and the experiences of these college basketball players who are playing, and their economic situations and their aspirations to play at a different league and stuff like that. But do you have anything else to tell them?
If you guys are running a bracket, invite us. We'll let you know what's up.
Yeah, there it is. Thanks, guys, for listening, and we'll see you next one.
Later.